All right, so you got your first real job, your first big paycheck. How can you be smart with your money? So, all right, so I've helped thousands of people plan their finances. Right now, you've got millions of things in front of you. Let me tell you what's important to you. So we're going to cover today the few basic things. There's a million things to know, but there's a few really important ones. I'm going to cover them kind of in a basic level, but I'm trying to give you an overview of the really important things to know. And we get this a lot, with millennials or kids of our clients. I'm trying to give you an introduction into the world of finance and what you need to know to be able to move ahead effectively. So my name is Ed Rempel. My blog, Unconventional Wisdom, is #1 in Canada for a financial planner. We're a team of fee-for-service financial planners, and we're Canada's experts on a few effective strategies. We help growth-focused Canadians achieve their life goals. All right, so let's talk about all the different options you have in your life. You got all kinds of options now, and I'm going to show you what you kind of have. Now, these are all different things, options that you may have in your life. So first of all, you got your first job. You're thinking ahead just for the next 5-10 years. What do you want to do? So if you're living with your parents, you may want to move out. Get your own place, and this is all about freedom. So it's a good thing to be able to do. So you may want to buy a car soon, or it's also about freedom. Then, you get your friends, now you get some money. So, you can start going out and enjoying life, having some fun. That's something else you may want to do. You've got to have a student loan. What do you do about that? Probably want to buy a home sometime in a few years. Give you some real sense of security. And then, it's really smart to start your long-term retirement savings. I know it's early, but it would be really smart. That gives you security and freedom. So you got all these things to do. Where do you start? So let me start talking about that. So first thing you need to do is figure out where you are. Okay, figure out, the first step is just list your income and expenses. And this is not about budgeting. All we're doing is trying to do for you is a little bit of planning. So let's think about how much can you save, and just look at it. Look at your income and your expenses. How much can you save? And try to save a good amount, and think about, like, you're trying to live intentionally. You think through what you want to do. So this is one of the main principles of financial planning. It's called pay yourself first. So better than budgeting, you're watching every dollar. Pay yourself first. All you do is you decide how much you can figure out how much you can save, and then you just start putting that away automatically every month, and the rest of the money you can freely spend. So, and it's the #1 principle of financial planning is spend less than you make. So you have to intentionally live below your means. And think about it. Let's say that your job you just made 20% less. How would you live then? And just live that way, and take that 20% and save it, that you're making it. And that's just a really important way to do that. Now, standard advice, if you don't know how much to save or what's smart, the standard advice is save 20% of your income. Now, it used to be they would say save 10%, a tithe, 1/10 of your income. But life is just getting more expensive all the time, and 10% rarely does it. 20% is generally the guideline. Now, the government, they give you 18% of your income is the amount that you put into RSPs. So even that, they're thinking, of around 20%. Now, when you're young, like, you may still be living with your parents. You may have there's lots of ways that you can house hack, like live really cheap when you're young, and you may be able to save 50% or more of your income. I've seen lots of people do that. So it is possible, and it's kind of a radical way to do it. It's a way to really get ahead quickly. So you need some money saving hacks and house hacks to be able to do that. But there's a whole FIRE community. FIRE is financial independence, retire early. These are people that want to, become independent early, like in their 30s and 40s, maybe retire fairly young and really enjoy life and have get all their time freedom. So there's a whole community out there, and lots of blogs to read about that. So the key thing here is decide what you want in your life. Look at all these goals, decide what you want. So now let's take a look at those 6 goals and just talk about how you would do each one and how you prioritize them. So the first one, moving out. getting your own place. So instead of living with your parents, you can move out, get your own place. And you know what? It's a really important step in becoming an adult. So it's actually a good thing to do. However, it's a big new large expense. Okay, so you're going to be going out and renting some money. All of a sudden, this big part of your paycheck goes over there. So just want to think this through before you do it. So I have to admit, so I moved out when I was 18. Went to live in residence at university, and I wanted freedom. But it meant that I had a lot less money than a lot of my friends who lived with their parents much longer. So something to think through. So now, if your goal is to live well as soon as possible, to be comfortable as soon as possible, then you may want to stay with your parents longer, or do some radical saving method, or find some house hack to live cheaply, and you can do that. And that's a really effective way to do it. It's much easier to do when you're young. So now you can start early, and I'll show you this later on, but compounding when you start early has a massive effect over saving, bit by bit. It's compounding of investments when you start early. It's really effective. And the house hacks you can do when you're young, that's hard to do when you're older. Instead of moving out and getting your own place, why don't you could move out with several friends, or you can move out and rent out a room, or get some roommates, live in a basement apartment. You can have subtenants. There's even a thing called a tiny house, 100 square feet by 100 square feet, 100 by 100, like 10 by 10 little thing. You can just like put it on somebody's yard. There are ways to live, radical ways to live with a lot lower cost. So and if you do that early and put away a lot of money, it's amazing how that can get you ahead. So now, the second one, buying a car. Let's just talk about that for a minute. Now, I actually have an article, I have a video on my blog all about this, about buying a car. And you know what? There's ways you can own a car for a lot less than what most people would say. So a car gives you freedom. Now you can go out and do what you want. You get a lot of freedom in your car. It is really cool. I know I got a car when I was very young, very quickly, was itching to have one. So but a car is not an investment. It's my dad always said it's a liability and not an asset. So as an accountant, and a past life, so I always thought, well, technically it's an asset. It's on the asset side of the sheet. But his point is well made, that you don't get any income. It's just constantly an expense. And it's so and so one of my advice here is minimize your spending early in your life on depreciating assets. They go down in value. They don't go up in value. You want to put your money into things that are going to grow. And it's very easy to save a lot of money on a car. So my own rule has always been this: I want to buy a car for half of what it costs new. If I'm going to buy a $30,000 car, I want to pay $15,000 for it. Or a $50,000 car, you want to pay 25. And the way to do that is you have to get it 3 years old, maybe 4, possibly more. Right now, there's a weird market that's hard to get. I'd probably just wait a year. But get it for half, and you have to get it 3 or 4 years old, get it after the warranty's gone, and that's how you could save a ton of money. Cars are just such an easy way to waste a lot of money. I got a whole video on that. Now, some people think you need a reliable, quote unquote, car. Often the reason I'm giving for having, buying something new instead of used, but used is where the money savings is. And the secret to it, if you want to have a reliable car, is just find a good, honest mechanic and get CAA, and you're in fine shape, and you can save tons of money on a car. And as your income goes up, for me, what I found, as my income goes up, I can get nicer cars, but I still want 50% off when I'm at 50% off of the new price. Well, so that's how I think of it. So now let's talk about having some fun. You want to go out and have some fun with your friends. What do you do about all that? So you finally got a paycheck. They're out, doing lots of fun things. So going out to restaurants and bars and whatever it is, beaches and vacations. And so, and friends are important, especially building up the friends that you get when you're young. you may well keep forever. So, however, part of this is you want to, at this point, find yourself friends, the right people you want to associate. Like if you feel you have to impress them through spending money, then maybe these are not the right kind of friends for yourself. Like be yourself, find people that fit who you want to be. So now there's a question of how much fun spending is smart. Like, so you want to do some of it. This is part of it. You have some money, you can enjoy life, but you don't want to get carried away. So what is that dividing line? So here's my principle. One principle about it is if you didn't pay your credit card in full last month, then you can't afford to spend anything on fun. That's it. So it's actually a huge rule. And you know what? The credit card, it's so easy to get caught up in credit card spending. And they say the interest rate is high, but it's actually way higher than you think. And I'll give you a story that explains this. So what happens is they charge you 20% on the outstanding balance, but also if you paid in full, you get like 6 weeks before you have with zero interest, right? Because it's not until the statement comes out and then when it's due. So I had a friend that actually had his credit card bill, his Visa bill came in, he owed $10 and he thought, I'm not going to bother paying it. How much can the interest be on $10 anyway? Well, it turns out the interest for 1 month on $10 was $200. I know what you're thinking. You mean $2? So nope, it was $200. So here's what happened. He owed $10. So because it wasn't paid off, he paid interest on all purchases from the date of purchase. So just after that, he went on a big expensive trip that cost over $10,000. And he was charged interest on everything in the trip from the date of purchase. And so by the 6 weeks, by the time the bill was due, it was $200 of interest on this $10. So this is why always pay your credit cards in full. In fact, you can set your credit cards to automatically take the full payment out of your credit card each time. And, if you can't afford something, get an unsecured credit line or emergency fund, but don't use the credit cards for it. So that's a great way to save a ton of money there. So now about how much spending is smart. So there's two types of people in the world: those that want to spend $1 million and those that want to have $1 million. Which one do you want to be? I can tell you, wealth is the net worth that you have. It's not how much you spend, it's how much you actually have. What you keep. So for example, a friend of yours makes $200,000 a year and spends it all. Another friend makes $50,000 a year, but saves $10,000 of it. Which one is richer? So I can tell you, it's all about what you have. It's what you keep. It's not what you make. So in fact, I always had this, 4-bedroom home and 2 new cars in the driveway rule. So back when I was first in financial planning, I used to actually go to clients' homes. And what I found is if you go to a home and you see it's a nice big 4-bedroom home and they have 2 minivans and 2 new cars in the driveway and the house is nicely, the yard is nicely landscaped, think, you know what? These people don't have any money, and almost always they don't. It's the house is fully mortgaged. They got a bunch of debts, credit card debts, student loan, credit lines. The cars that are in the nice new cars are both leased, and they have hardly any net worth, and hardly any investments in it. And it's amazing how common that is. They say that 2/3 of Canadians are 2 paychecks from bankruptcy. And I've seen the full finances of thousands of people, and I can tell you that's mostly true. So now there's a book out there called The Millionaire Mind, and it's about having the mindset of thinking of yourself as a wealthy person. Now that you're starting out, you probably just think of yourself as, I'm a person that just barely gets by. I don't make much income yet. But change your mindset. Think of yourself. You are a person that has a lot of money or is going to have a lot of money because you're going to make the smart decisions for it and just start thinking that way. So now, another really cool book out there is called The Millionaire Next Door. It's really interesting, and it is what I see every day when I see people. So the millionaires are not the people, the vast majority of millionaires aren't the people with the big mansions and the expensive cars. Most millionaires live in an average neighborhood. They blend right in. Their friends don't even know that they're millionaires or multimillionaires, but they have this huge financial security and this kind of quiet confidence about them. And that's what really happens. And the stereotype is that the girls are attracted to the guy who's got the hot car. You've probably seen that all over in lots of movies. But as a financial guy, I can tell you that a new car, especially an expensive car, is the sign of a spender, not of a rich person. And I can tell you from seeing thousands of people's money, there is zero correlation between nice cars and money. I've seen both extremes. I've seen multimillionaires driving a 20-year-old Honda, and I've seen people with zero net worth driving $100,000 cars. They both happen a lot. There's no correlation at all between them. So I can tell you that I have learned to recognize when people have money and not, and it's just because I get to meet people and then I see their full finances for like thousands of people. And I could usually see it. I go to a party and I start talking with people. I can tell right off who's got money and who doesn't. And you know what it is? It's the people that are flashing a lot of money, bragging about the rentals they did on their house and the cars that they have and the trips. And those people are not the wealthy people, because if they're trying to look wealthy. So the harder you try to look wealthy, the less money you actually have. It's the people that actually have money don't want to separate themselves too much about other people. They have this quiet confidence about them. It's just a very different, it's a different way of thinking. And so you can train yourself to be able to be that way. And now when you're deciding on a lifestyle, how much fun do you want to have, think about this. You want to save up for the future, or when you're young, you just tend to think, long term is up until the weekend, and you're just thinking about, what fun I'm going to have on the weekend. But think about putting some money, thinking long term, and starting to put some money away long term. All right. So next thing I want to talk about is student loans. So you have a student loan, and I find a lot of students, once they get their degree, the first thing they want to do is pay off their loan. It's the first big debt they have, and they want to pay it off. And I have an article on my blog about it, and I can tell you, most likely, that's the worst thing you should do. So I just show you all these different priorities, and this is probably, for most people, this is the lowest priority of anything you should have. All the other ones on this list are more important to your life. And so the classic story that I see all the time, I call it the frustrated student loan payer. So in your early 20s or mid 20s, you finish off your degree, and then you got to pay off. You start focusing on your loan, and you pay off the student loan. Now it's your late 20s or 30, and you finally paid the loan off. And the truth is, you've got nothing. You've just gotten up to zero, is where you are. And now it's what happens. You want to buy a car, you want to save up for a home, but you got no money for a house down payment, and you got nothing. So you've gotten this far and you haven't got anywhere yet. It's much better. Pay off the student loan as slow as possible. A lot of the loans, like the OSAP loan, all the student loans have tax breaks with them, so that you're not taxed that highly. So just pay it off, just make the minimum payment on it, and focus your money on all these other goals. So I got a good article on all about that. So now next one, let's just talk about buying a house. So, all right, and a house, helps you feel financially solid when you own a home, and it's a decent investment. They actually have pretty good growth, and it's tax-free growth. So it's a great thing to do, to buy a home. So it gives you a really solid feeling. So first thing is, don't buy too soon. So don't buy until, this is my advice, until you know you will be in that place for at least 5 years. And the reason for it is, if you buy a house and sell it, all the costs of buying and the cost of selling, you basically need to own a home for at least 5 years just to get your money back out of it. So don't buy until you know you're going to be in that place for quite a while. And there's a question of, should you buy or rent? And I know you think, it's much more financially responsible to buy, I should buy. And As a general rule, that is true, but there are exceptions. And so, first of all, let me give you the reasons that the reasons on the other side, because the buy reasons seem so obvious to you. Right? I buy a home and I own it, it grows in value. So, but if you rent, first of all, studies show that renters actually tend to have better careers because they can move to better jobs, especially when you're young. You get this offered this great new job. It's often in another city. If you're a renter, you could just move and take this new job, right? Once you have a home, it's really hard to move and take, good opportunities that come along. Also, renting has lower costs. So here in the Toronto area, costs have gotten really out of whack. So, if you take two identical condos right beside each other and one person owns, one person rents, the person that's owning is probably paying $500 a month more than the person that's renting. But, between all the costs that are there, there's, some repairs, but it's mostly condo fees and mortgage and utilities and everything else. So if you take that $500 a month that you're saving and you invest all of it, invest it effectively, you can, over 20 or 30 years, you can actually have more wealth than the homeowner. Now, the difference is most people that rent don't save at all. And so the house is kind of a forced savings. That's why it kind of works. But you can actually be better off renting if you do it effectively. So now, the big thing about equities versus about real estate, as opposed to other types of investing, is that it's all about leverage. And so here's an example. I just want to show you this chart here. This is comparing the stock market, which is, I call it equities, it's investing in big companies, as this is kind of the solid long way to invest, and comparing it. So this is in Toronto. This purple line down here is the average house price in Toronto. Now, in 1975, it was 75,000. Now it's like a little over $1 million. But this is the stock market. Canadian stock market. If you invested the same amount in the Canadian stock market, you have 4 million. World stock market, 5.5 million. U.S. market, you have closer to 10 million. So you have way more money. So in the last 45 years, the Toronto Stock Exchange, Toronto stock market, has had 6 times the growth of Toronto real estate. So it's much higher growth long term. Now, the reason that real estate does well is all about leverage. Because, so for example, I have people coming to me and say, I have 100,000. Should I put it in the stock market, or I should put it down on a $500,000 home? So you see the difference. You get a mortgage for the difference. So now you're comparing 500,000 in real estate to 100,000 in the stock market. Well, the house is probably going to do better because it's 5 times as much invested. But if you also, borrowed to invest in the stock market, you had a similar amount invested, then the stock market would do much better. So it's all about leverage when you compare these different options. So, and you think that real estate is safe, but you know what? It tends to move in much bigger, slower cycles in the stock market. But when it goes down, so this is the last between 1950 and now, the biggest decline we've seen here in Toronto. Real estate is 28% and stocks 43%. So you see, it's actually got 2/3 of the downside risk of the stock market. And real estate took 13 years to get back even. The longest the stock market's ever taken is 6. There's a lot more declines, but they come back much more quickly. So it's, real estate is somewhat safer, but it's not, it's not like a lot of people think. I think real estate safe, stocks are risky. But when you look long term about it, it's a different view of it. So now, if you buy versus rent and you're investing here in stocks, it's just a much more effective way actually to build for the long time. And an important thing to remember is when you're saving up for your retirement, your home is not your retirement, right? Because you probably want to live in it when you're retired. So you need something else there. So now you're deciding what you want to buy with your home. Okay, how do you decide how much you can buy? So now a lot of people just buy the most expensive home they could possibly buy that they can qualify for, and that's where you can run yourself into a problem. So generally, you want to think of you don't want to be house poor, house poor, I mean, I've seen that. It's so people that buy a house and they can't even afford to buy furniture on it, or they complain, I can't throw money because I'm putting it all into my mortgage because they just bought too much house. So the general rule is buy within your means. Buy a home that you're going to be happy with in at least 10 years, first of all. So a lot of people think, I'm going to buy my starter home, and in 5 years I'll buy my next home. Well, you know what? You might be better off buy the second home first. All right. Because every time you move, it's going to cost you 50 to 100,000 every time you move, between real estate fees and moving and everything else. So, but also stay modest with it. You don't want to be house poor, and and you want to be able to save enough. The smart thing is save enough so that you could still invest 20% of your income, where you can still save a good amount on top of that. You still have some money. So now it's smart to have a 20% down payment, and the reason for it is because of this. If you have less than 20%, then you pay a fee, and the fee has no benefit to you. So for example, if you put 5% down on a home, you pay a 4% fee. $500,000 home paying $20,000 fee for this, because you only have 5% down. It's a percentage of the mortgage, but it's close enough. So it's you're paying this huge fee, and it's there to protect the bank. There's no benefit for you. So if you put 10% down or 15, then you pay a smaller fee, and if you have 20% down, you don't need any CMHC. You have no fee at all. So you've saved all of this. Okay, so it's smart to do. Now, the problem with it is it's a big amount. Let's say you want to buy a $500,000 home, which is in Toronto isn't anything great. $500,000 home, 20% is $100,000 down. So that's quite a bit of money. So you're just starting to get your first paycheck and thinking, I got to save $100,000. How long is it going to take me to do that? Now, the other option is, so it's smart to put the 20% down, but the other option is you just put the minimum 5% down, pay your CMHC fee. And the fee is as large basically as your down payments. You kind of lost your whole down payment, but then maybe you can get in sooner. So so my general rule of thumb is, if you can save the 20% down in 3 years or less, then save the 20% down, and you're better off, and you've gotten a good ways ahead. However, if it's going to take you 5 or 10 years to save up the $100,000, then you know what, just put your 5% down, pay your fee, your CMHC fee, get in the house, get started on it, because you don't want to spend 5 or 10 years just saving for the down payment. And the house keeps going up, you just you can maybe never get in that way. So now, how do you save for the down payment? How do you save? So now, generally, the best place to save is to start, at least, is in your RSP. There's a program called the Home Buyers Plan. You can borrow up to $35,000 out of your RSP. And the thing about it is, you put money in RSP, and you also get a tax refund on it. So it's costing you quite a bit less to do that. Now, one thing about that is, when you're starting your job, depending on what your starting income is, you may or may not necessarily deduct the RSP. So these are the tax brackets. Up to 50,000 is the 20% bracket. Over 50,000 is the 30% bracket, and there's higher ones after that. These are just the general rough ones. Okay. Now, when you retire, if you plan effectively, you can live. You can have 100, 150,000 of cash income and all be the lowest tax bracket. So you're probably going to retire at this bracket, although there's a lot of government benefits that are clawed back based on your income. So you're probably going to be on 20% or more when you retire. So the general rule is, it's not worth deducting your RSP contributions until your income's over 50,000. Okay, you only deduct enough to bring your taxable income down to 50,000 with the deduction, right? Claiming the deduction reduces your taxable income. All right, but what you can do is, you can contribute to the RSP, but you record it on your tax return, but you don't deduct it, and you carry it forward to a future year when your income is higher. So that's if your income is below 50. If it's over 50, just claim the deduction, get your refund on it right away. Right? If you're in this 50 to 100,000 bracket, then you get 30% back. So you can get 30 or 40% back on it right away. And this helps you save for your down payment much more quickly. So now, if you want to buy a home quickly, so here's a smart thing to do: go out and get an RSP loan, especially if you got a spouse. What you can do is you can each borrow 35,000. You get RSP loan. You put them in RSP. Now, with a home buyers program, you have to wait 90 days, and then you can pull out your 70,000 bucks that you've now got for your down payment. And like, you're pretty close to you probably already got your 5 or 10% down. You're closer to your 20% down because you just got 70,000. Now remember, now you have these big RSP loans that you have to pay on top of your mortgage, but that's a way to get in much quicker. So another reason to do the 20% down is because there's an effective investment strategy once you own a home and have 20% down called the Smith maneuver. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on, but you need the 20% down first just to be able to get in the door that way. And the Smith maneuver strategy that allows you to invest for your retirement without using your cash flow. So once you're in a home, it can help you build up your net worth and your retirement fund faster that way. So that's a bit about buying a home. Now let's talk a bit about long-term savings, because when you get your first job and you're thinking, should I really be saving for retirement? Jesus, like 40 years from now, why should I worry about that? And there are some actually really important reasons to think about it. So, it's about the Smith maneuver there. So, and here's what it is. There's the magic of compounding. Okay, so Albert Einstein said, compounding is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. So let's compare. If you're, let's say, 25, saving till you're 40, or till you're 65, you get 40 years. But if you wait, say, it's 40 years from now, I'll wait till I'm making more money in my 30s. And then you have 30 years in front of you to retire. But if you look at the difference between is $1,000 a month, with 8% or 10% growth, you'll have 1.5 to 2 million bucks. But in 40 years, you have 30 years. But the extra 10 years by starting early, you end up with way more money. So this, with the magic of compounding, if you do this effectively, it doesn't take a lot to be a multimillionaire when you're older by putting this money away. And starting early is just an awesome way to do it. So, and you think, well, I just started my first job. I got all these. I just showed you all these different goals you have. How do you start putting something away here? And all I suggest to you is, make it a priority. Like, when you think about what your priority is, start put 10% of your income. That's a way for the long term. That's just such a cool way to go. And if you wait till later on in your life, what you're going to find is there is no good time to start. So in your 20s, you got all these priorities, your income's not that high. But once you get in your 30s, what happens is you're in a house and you're married and you have kids, and you can't afford it that way either because you've got kids. And then you've got kids into your 40s. And then after that, the kids are in university. And then by then you're in your 50s, and you know what? It's already too late to start really saving. So there's never a good time. You just have to prioritize it and start. So, and radical savings, finding ways to save a lot early in your career, it's just so effective when it comes to living a great life later on. And it's actually a really huge thing. So now another important thing here is, before I show you that, another important thing is that, you think, well, I'm putting some money, well, I can rely on the government, right? And the truth is you can't count on the government. Their benefits their retirement benefits are small, and they're not reliable. So the government, is hugely in debt. It can't live within its means. And right, now the government's borrowing 50 or 100 billion a year, and it's just for the current lifestyle expenses. These are not, it's like they're investing for the future. It's just for their current expenses. So, and here's something that you may not know: the government debt is never paid down. So this year, 2022, our Canadian government is borrowing 150 billion or so, and that 150 billion, every single dollar of it will be owed 100 years from now, and you and your kids and grandkids are just going to pay interest on it forever. So so as a financial planner, I find this seriously is, there's two government programs, old age security that is paid entirely by the government, and Canada Pension Plan where you and your employer pay in and there's an actual pension. So CPP is probably going to be okay, but the old age security that you have to count on the government, that I think is just really, I think it's going to become more like welfare for the old, that they're not going to want to pay it to people that have other kinds of money. I don't think the government is going to be able to afford it. And, we just don't have a government that can provide for us long term. So bottom line is you need to provide for yourself. You need to rely on yourself. You can't count on the government. So now I just want to show you what a retirement plan basically looks like. Now this, I'm not going to get much into this, but it's a really important concept just to get kind of the picture of it, because you'll find the numbers are shocking. The short story is that to retire, you need a lot more money than you think. That's the bad news. But the good news is you can get there with investing a much less than you think. So let me just give you kind of a picture of it. And so when I've got young people that I'm just trying to show the future, just show you like, this is what a retirement plan kind of looks like. And I realize when you're 25, you don't even need your long-term lifestyle yet. You don't really know where you're going down the road. So you don't really need a retirement plan, but you need to have a concept and start putting some money away. So this is just to give you a picture of it. Let's say that you're 30, you're married, and you and your spouse each make 50,000, and so you're making 100,000 between you, and you want to retire at age 65. Or actually, sorry, should be age 60. I get the number wiped out here, but you're retiring at 60 in 30 years, and you're going to make 50,000, so you live on 100,000. So you're basically retiring on the same lifestyle that you have today. Okay, and in between you'll make more, but you're going to retire and come back to the same lifestyle. Now with this one here, I've assumed that both of you get the maximum Canada Pension Plan and old age security, even though I'm not sure that you will. And I've assumed that you've invested averaging 8% in growth and 100% in equities, no fixed income. I'll explain that all in a minute, but just to give you a sense of where you'd be. So here's how much you need. Let me move my head out of the way so you can see this. So you actually need 2.8 million to retire on this 100,000, even though you both get the maximum pension. Okay, and to get there, you need to put, let me move my head here, 1,300 a month. Okay, that's about 16,000 a year. Okay, so now you and your spouse together make 100,000. That's 16,000. That's 16% of your income. You need to save all in equities to be able to get this kind of modest retirement. And so, that kind of fits, the governments give you 18% of your income as RSP room. So just think of it as good thing is, as soon as your income's over 50,000, maximize your RSP room all the time. That's a good, just basic amount. You don't know where you're going long-term yet, but it's a great way to start. Once you get into your long-term lifestyle, that's when you should try to actually create a retirement plan, figure out specifically how do you want to retire, make a specific plan for it. But if you maximize your RSP along the way, then you've got a good head start, and you're kind of on the right road. So now I'm talking about this investing 100% equities, and that's actually a really important thing to do. And it's not what anyone in the investment industry is going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you why you need to do that. So first of all, there is a lot more growth in the stock market than there is in fixed income over the long term. And I can tell you that I've done, like thousands of financial plans for people. And what I can tell you is basically nobody can retire comfortably with an asset allocation portfolio. So what they say is you need some stocks, some bonds, some cash, the stock. What happens is the stocks, you're investing in companies that are growing, and that's where the growth comes from. And you buy some bonds, so bonds or government bonds or company bonds where you just get interest, and that kind of protects you. So when the market goes down, these don't go down, or not nearly as much. So your portfolio is more steady that way. The problem is that your portfolio also has a way lower rate of return, and it's so low that you probably can't make your retirement plan. Now, the people in the investment industry don't know this because almost none of them have ever done or seen a financial plan, and all they're worried about is keeping you as a client, and that you might want to panic and sell if your investments go down. But it's important to learn to have a higher risk tolerance, invest all in equities. That's really the only way that you can retire effectively. So risk tolerance, you know, you go to an investment person, they'll give you a risk tolerance questionnaire and they'll say, this is the risk level you're at. The truth is, risk tolerance is a learned skill. I used to be scared to fly and I guess terrified every time you had some turbulence. Now I've flown a lot, not scary at all. So, you know what I mean? It's, you just learn that this is the way to do. And flying, you know, it's the fastest way to get to your destination. So it's develop this risk tolerance. So a good way to invest, you're starting out, you don't really know how to invest. Buy a global equity so get an index which is a broad base of stocks. So global equity is all over the world. S&P 500 is just over the US. They're kind of the biggest main stock market. Get an ETF or an index fund, and you just buy one, just a global equity or an S&P one. Or what you can do is find a trusted financial planner that's going to help you with it. But if you're looking for a financial planner, first thing is make sure that they will let you invest 100% in equities and educate you and help you to understand what that is like, what the down years are like, how often do they happen, how quickly does it come back, and you need to understand what it is. Because the ones that are going to tell you need stocks, bonds, and cash and be within your risk tolerance, these are all short-term thinkers. They don't do the financial plans, and you're just not going to make nearly enough for your future. So now, you know, you're starting out, you don't have a lot of money yet. You only have 5 or 10,000. You think, geez, I'm making 10% of my money. That's only $1,000 I'm making in it. You know, it's not growing very fast. So I need to grow faster. So there's a tendency when you're young to think that you need to gamble. You need to do the risky things like buy cryptocurrencies because, you know, they've had some big returns for a while. You know, now they've fallen a lot, but my advice is don't get caught up on it. And so because we're trying to put away lots of money, remember, you've got the millionaire mindset, you're going to be a millionaire down the road, and you need investments where you have confidence in the long-term growth. And, you know, cryptocurrencies are new. There isn't really an intrinsic value. It's not like you're investing in a company that actually has a value and makes growing profits. So the intrinsic value, Warren Buffett, you know, one of the greatest investors of all, says the intrinsic value of cryptocurrencies is zero. So they may or may not survive, but who knows if they're going to grow? They might, the value might be $1, maybe they're going to fall 99%. So I think 80 to 100% declines in them are likely. And I don't know where they're going, and that's the problem is I only wanted to invest in things where I am confident in long-term growth. So rather than taking, you know, big risks on things, the way to get a higher return is to stick with something solid that's growing. So for example, I just want to show you, this is the stock market. This is from 1800 till now. So it's 220-year status. And when you look at, this is the trend line in the stocks, notice how reliable it is long-term. And people tell you, oh, stocks are risky, they're all over the map. And the short-term and even medium-term, that is completely true. All right. But long term, they're actually really reliable. And the reason is you're investing in big companies that are growing profits. And whatever happens in the world, the companies adjust their operations to keep their profits growing. And that's why whatever happens, they adapt to it over time. So notice how close it always is to the trend line. Long-term growth is 6.8, real means after inflation. So let's say 7% above inflation is the long-term growth. And you don't experience it this smoothly because this is decades that you're ahead and behind. It's an exponential graph. But the point is, stocks are really reliable long-term. And remember, this goes back through much worse things that have happened now. This goes back to the Revolutionary War in the States, the 2 big world wars, which are much bigger than anything happening now. There were previous pandemics when they didn't have vaccines, the Great Depression, and, you know, it still powers through fine over time. And so, you know, over a 1-year period, you see stocks, you know, they're up 20 or 30%. Next year, they're down 10, 20, 30%, and they fluctuate a lot. But see, once you're in for 25-year periods, so this is the 25-year periods. So every line is the last 25 years. And, you know, this period is kind of the modern stock market. Before it was all agricultural stocks and railway. And, you know, basically over 25 years, the stock market has basically always made at least 8% as a average over a 25-year period. So if you're in for a long time, it's just a really reliable way to go. So now, we're investing solidly. If you want to get a higher rate of return, instead of doing a gamble, what you do is you leverage it up, you borrow money. And that's just borrowing to invest is also risky, but it's a much more reliable thing. Borrow to invest in something reliable as opposed to just taking a big gamble on something. So if you want to get higher returns, use leverage. Leverage is the term for borrowing to invest. Okay, so you can get an investment loan. You can get an RSP loan. You can get a mortgage. Use a secured credit line on your home. There's different ways to borrow to invest, but it's much better than doing a big gamble. So, and there's a few strategies that we're kind of experts on. So one of them, so if you're a millennial or you're young, this is kind of the ultimate strategy for millennials. I've got a couple articles on my blog about this and a video. So it's about life cycle investing. Okay, it's the ultimate strategy. And so basically the concept is, in your 20s or 30s, you borrow as much as you can to put into equities. By your 50s, you pay off the loan, and then 60s, you move to your desired asset allocation. And that strategy the book is by two university professors who proved that over the last 150 years, this strategy versus the normal way you're doing bit by bit, you're investing a bit every year. This strategy actually left you better off 100% of the time over a 40-year life. So it's actually a really cool way. You borrow a lot when you're young, and it's kind of what you're doing is you're buying a retirement like you buy a car, like you buy a house. So you buy a house, you go get a big mortgage, and you get the whole thing, and then you slowly pay it off, right? So when you do for your retirement, you start with a small amount and build up, and what happens is this. You have what's called last decade risk. So if you're putting away 10,000 a year, here's what actually happens. In your first year, let's say you're retiring, you're saving for 40 years from age 25 to 65. In the first 10 years, you get hardly any money. So really what made a rate of return you get hardly even matters, Only 2% of your lifetime money is in that period. Then, what happens is almost all the money you have is at the end. So 90% of your investments are after you're 45, and 2/3 are after you're 55. So the problem with doing it bit by bit, and the reason it's risky, by just saving 1,000 a month for 40 years, is because if the last decade of your life is a lousy rate of return, then the entire 40 years is a lousy rate of return. Seriously. And the second worst decade we've had in the last 150 years was the 2000, between 2000 and 2010. And so, people that have been saving, that have been saving up and, reach 45 at age, 19, at 2000, what happened, or age 55, what happened is their last decade, they made hardly anything, and then their whole 40 years is a lousy thing to do, is a lousy rate of return. So that's why borrowing early and paying it off is actually quite an effective way to do things. So, what I'm trying to show you also from this is that it's the dollars invested that is more important to you when you're young. It's more important than rate of return. Again, that's why you don't take a big risky gamble on something. You look for something with solid rate of return and look ways for a borrower to get a larger amount invested. So the other strategy is what it's called. I call it the Rempel maximum. And again, I got a blog on it, article on it. It's a bit more of a concept, the concept of just trying to maximize everything you have. And this is, just showing you how much better it is than what the conventional methods that most people do. So basically the Rempel maximum in concept, what you're doing is you're borrowing the maximum that you can without affecting your cash flow. And you use your cash flow, instead of investing it, you're borrowing money and using your cash flow to make the payments. Okay. An example, let's say you're putting 2,000 a month into your RSP. Okay. So another concept would be you go out and get a 500,000 investment loan. Now your interest payments are 2,000 a month. Okay, now both ways you're using 2,000 a month of your cash flow. Both ways the 2,000 a month is tax deductible, but you've got 500,000 invested, not 24,000, and that's why it gets you ahead so much faster. Now it's more complicated because you can't necessarily qualify for this, and so. But I'm just think of it more as a concept of trying to build up your wealth this way. And you have to do this very responsibly because you want to make sure that you can, you're never forced to you never have a margin call and are forced to sell when it's low, and you can always make the payments, and you have to do it responsibly and think through how much you do. But the concept is it can get you ahead way faster. So now, ways to borrow to invest. You can get a secured credit line on your home. You can do the Smith maneuver strategy once you have your home. Right, Smith maneuver, as your mortgage is getting paid back down, you borrow back a little bit to invest from there. From a linked credit line, you have to get a re-advanceable mortgage. That's where a mortgage is linked with a credit line, and as you might pay down the mortgage down, you're slowly getting credit in the credit line that you can borrow to invest. You can go in and get investment loans. There's 100% loans and 3-for-1 loans. And the important thing about all of these loans is they should be no margin call. Okay, because you can get a no margin call loan if you're using your credit line or a mortgage or something to invest for, then your house is collateral. So the investments are not collateral, and that's key, because if the investments drop in value, you're never forced to pay up for it. You can also borrow from family. I've seen people do that, have their parents have extra money that they just lend them, or they just their parents let them use the credit line in their home or something like that. But what you should avoid is margin accounts like at brokerage firms or leverage ETFs. The problem with a margin account is if your investments go down and you have to come up with money, or they force you to sell. And the last thing, if you're going to borrow to invest for 30 years, and once in that 30 years, you're forced to cash in and sell everything at the bottom, then you've just wiped out your entire 30-year strategy. So for borrowing to invest, you need a zero risk of a margin call. Okay, so that's why I avoid margin accounts. And people think, oh, I just buy a leverage ETF. That's why I'm getting leverage on it. The problem is the math of them, the way they work, you pretty well always lose money over them long term, even in a rising market. It's just kind of the math of the way they work. So something to be able to avoid. These are the better ways to be able to borrow to invest. And you also got to remember, borrowing to invest is risky. Okay, because this is why you have to think it through. Market declines are scarier with borrowed money. You owe the money regardless of how your investment has done. It magnifies your gains and magnifies your losses, both short-term and long-term. So short, medium term. So, borrowing to invest is not for everybody. You have to be this growth-focused, patient, long-term person with a higher risk tolerance, but you can learn to become that kind of person. So especially if you give, some effective coaching that you're working with. So effective leverage, it's got to be over the long term. That's my recommendation is anytime you borrow to invest, commit to doing it for a minimum of 20 years, no matter what. And if you're not going to commit to 20 years, then don't even start. And the reason for that is because, as I showed you before, the stock market is actually very reliable as a long-term investment. So if you borrow to invest, you don't want to borrow to invest in bonds that have a lower, you can't borrow at 4%, invest at 3% in interest-bearing, in interest-bearing investments, you're just losing money. So you need to invest it in growing investments, and it is reliable long-term, and that's why you have to commit to long-term, because if you do it, you want a really high chance it's actually going to work for you. So you need to learn the skill of having a higher risk tolerance. It is a skill you could learn. You got to be a growth-focused person, and if you're part of this F.I.R.E community, borrowing to invest is just an awesome fit for you. So it's the most effective way to grow your wealth is with leverage, and the best way to start with it is have a financial plan. Because think through your long term. How does this fit in with your long term, and make sure it fits with long term what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so that's all about this Rempel maximum, and that's just another possible way to do things. So, all right, so the best possible advice for you. Let's just talk about bottom lining it. So we just went through all these six different possible life goals that you have. I just wanted you to talk about each one of them. What is really the smartest thing to do? Now, for most people, the best thing to do is just decide on your goals, like look at your cash flow and decide on what your goals are, figure out how much you can save, pay yourself for it, and just start putting something away. Live intentionally, think about what you want to do. But for most people, what you should do is buy a home It's kind of the common sense thing for most people. So start saving for your down payment. Buy a modest home that you can afford with just 20%, or you can afford. You buy it with 20% down, and then after you buy it, you can still afford to put 20% of your income towards your retirement. So buy something more modest, and be frugal. Like, don't start spending a lot of money, because it's hard to ever give it up. It's called lifestyle creep. As over time you get more and more things that you like to do, and your lifestyle costs more and more and more. So don't start that too early. Be frugal. Save up, buy a home, make sure you have enough money to start to be able to save as well. And that's really the smart thing to do for most people. Now, some people want to actually retire soon, and they call it freedom, time freedom. And, as a financial planner, it used to be that people that retired always retired in their 60s or late 50s. And that was about all there ever was. And lately, I've actually helped. We've written financial plans for people retiring in their 40s, in some cases even the 30s. This is possible if you're, very frugal and it's important to you. So you live a more modest life and you save a ton of money when you're young, but you can actually retire early. Just think of that time freedom. So some people are like that. There's a ton of these FIRE blogs. I have some articles about it as well. So that's just, if you want it soon, that's another possibility. Also, for the people that want to live comfortably, so not just the massive, but just want to live pretty comfortably, the thing to do is buy a home and then do the Smith maneuver. That's kind of Smith maneuver sounds like a weird kind of thing, but it's really kind of a mainstream, normalized way that's fairly easy to do, with a little bit of coaching. So what it does, it gives you the comfort of owning your own home, plus it gives you investments that you could do without using a cash flow. So this is, it's investments for your retirement in addition to your RSPs and TFSAs and things. So now what you do to buy it, just use your RSP or possibly RSP loans, get the 20% down, buy this, modest starter home kind of house, mid kind of home or you can also save where you could get the down payment 3 years less and still be able to save after that. But also, as soon as you buy with the 20% down, get a readvanceable mortgage. I have the best article on the whole Smith maneuver strategy on the internet. Is on my blog. It's very in depth, but you can just learn how to do this Smith maneuver strategy, and it's just a great way to build wealth over time once you own a home. Now, for those of you that want to live well in your life, then you should look at these strategies, these effective strategies. I have them on my blog: the life cycle investing and the Rempel maximum strategy. These kind of strategies are for the people that really want to live well. And what happens is, once you have a large portfolio, you just get this sense of confidence about you. And it's hard to explain. I know when you're young, you just get your first paycheck, but just think of yourself, if you got millions of dollars in a portfolio, you just got this really sense of confidence and freedom that you can do what you want in your life. And it sounds kind of weird, like, what am I gonna do with all that money? But it's what it does for your self-confidence is quite something. So that's a reason to be able to think that way. And to get there, you got to do some radical saving and some creative leverage, especially early in your life. Like buy a home, use the credit line and for a Smith maneuver, get 3-for-1 loans, investment loans. You start saving some money and you can get a 3-for-1 loan on that. And if you do that regularly, you could build up significant investments. Smith maneuver can help you get larger loans, like you build up some equity, some credit available in your home, and you could pledge that for an investment loan. So also you can, if you're doing this and you can't afford to also buy your home, then maybe you should just rent. Because if you're doing these radical stuff and going to do large amounts of investment loans, then that's actually more important for building up wealth than owning a home. It's good if you can do both, but that kind of thing will actually get you ahead faster than, or much, a lot more over time than owning a home. So this is all, a FIRE community. You think they're weird. It's a small number of people, but it's actually a lot of people. And, the Smith maneuver and the Rempel maximum, I have articles on my blog about it. So how can we help? So we are a team of fee-for-service financial planners. And normally what we do is we just write a financial plan for you. So we help you figure out your life. And we do it very in depth. We've got software that's, I call it interactive. It can actually look at many different scenarios for your life, all within seconds. We normally charge $5,000 for a financial plan, and you get 2,000 back if you work with us full service. Like full service means we look after all parts of your finances, including investing 100% of your investments. So through one of our portfolio managers. However, like if you're in your 25, you're in your 20s, you just got your first job, and you're saving up, then we have something we call the plan discussion. And the idea is, at that point, your life is fairly simple, and you may not even know what you're not be into your long-term lifestyle yet. So you don't really need a financial plan. What you need is just kind of this general discussion, talk about your life, look at what's affordable, think ahead, and then just start on a road. And the plan discussion, we have our detailed meeting with you to figure out what you want in your life and help you think it through. But we don't actually write a plan. We just work with you together to implement it. Okay, and that's what we only charge $1,000, so that would be affordable for you. And what we charge is 1% of your investments for full service clients, and which, we have a small portfolio, isn't much money, but we try to, even though we have very valuable life that really helps you a lot, financial planning, we just do the financial planning, right? And we refer out to to portfolio managers, but these independent portfolio managers are the elite investors. They're the only investors in Canada that have a fiduciary duty to do what's in your best interest. And we have two of them that we use that both have long-term track records beating the index. And we think that they actually will continue to. So even though we have this, comprehensive financial planning advice, we try to pay for ourselves entirely through having you outperform. So once you would get returns above what a broad index would be, after all fees, including ours. And for example, so here's our one of our main portfolio managers. We call him the all-star fund manager. He's trying to find the world's best fund managers, and we've been working with him for 3 years. But he's buying these. Investing in these, he's trying to find the world's best investors that all have long-term track records beating the index. But this is our actual return. So actual return after all fees, including ours, we'd average 20.4 versus the index doing 15.9. So significantly higher rate of return. We have a somewhat higher rate of return. We're not going to be usually beat it by this much, but we've been ahead of the index. Even after all fees, including ours. So that's how we try to pay for ourselves. And, we want to make sure that we're a benefit for you and that our advice is just purely value added. So, all right. So now what have you learned? What you've learned is that we've got all these different goals in your life, and you need to start just think through your cash flow, think intentionally of what you want in your life, and think about what is priority, and and start moving ahead in the right way, and get to get a little bit knowledgeable. Also, to learn more, actually, let me just move here. To learn more, my blog, Unconventional Wisdom, it's the #1 blog in Canada for a financial planner, and this is edrempel.com or unconventionalwisdom.ca. Make sure you use the .ca. Under the strategies tab, we talk about the Smith maneuver and life cycle investing and Rempel maximum, all that kind of stuff. Services, we have all of our different services and portfolio managers and stuff. And if you want to talk to us, just go to contact. We have a free 30-minute consultation. We can just talk to you and just see, I don't know, are we a fit to be able to work together? And I've got a blog, and my blog and my YouTube channel, you can subscribe to them. And what happens then is that whenever I write an article or do a video, I'm trying to do one of them a week. Then if you just subscribe, you get them all sent directly to your mail. All right, they get sent directly to you. So thank you for listening. And again, if you like this video, then just like and share it, and on both YouTube and on my video. And we hope to talk to you again soon.